Welcome. Today's post is Secrets of Red Pills. Published on November 8, 2022. Would you take a mysterious drug handed to you by a stranger promising to wake you up? Let's think about this a bit. Here are the topics we'll be decoding today. You can always find this list in the description below. If you enjoy this video, please press the like button and subscribe for weekly full-length blog posts and shorter, more shareable videos. Let's begin. Red pilling is a common way to describe introducing someone to conspiracy theories. Red pill. The symbol is usually viewed as originating from the Matrix. I say usually because in doing research for this post I found the actual origin of the symbol comes from Total Recall, which caught my eye as the origin of important symbols often give a roadmap to intent. It even has the same connotation of waking up from a dream. Though in this film he rejects the red pill. Total Recall is a movie about a man bored with life choosing to get the memories of a secret agent implanted. He then has an adventure that is identical to the story he purchased, and this is why most of the movie can be interpreted as a dream. From the moment he hops in the chair all the way through to the end. Though doing a little digging clarifies that in fact it was all a dream, and he needed to take that red pill to stay alive. The director asserts the main character just followed the script. A script which, just like Neo in the Matrix, involves a man getting plugged into a computer which turns him into a mass-murdering terrorist. Why is this relevant? When I looked into the release date of Total Recall, June 1, 1990, Total Recall, origin of red pill symbol. Doctor plugs man into machine that puts to sleep and kills. June 4, 1990. Jack Kevorkian begins plugging people into his death machine leads to 130 assistant suicides. A movie about people tired of their life buying a ticket for a machine that puts them to sleep, and then they die, if we go by the director, and this was released the same week as Dr. Kevorkian introduced the world to a death machine that did the same thing. Often movies are markers for things long planned out, and so I doubt this was someone who was obsessed with helping people commit suicide. I suspect it was a group of people that wanted to assisted suicides to become a global news phenomenon. To promote suicide. The doctor was likely another tendril of those psychological operations. Keep in mind it's not just the, at times, justifiable ending of pain he was giving patients but the effects of the argument on the populace. Telling unhinged people that rather than overcome their issues it's fine to take an easy way out. One difference between Kevorkian and Total Recall is that the latter had an additional layer of getting a man to join a terrorist group and murder authority figures. One could make the same argument as The Matrix, that the main character rejects reality and becomes a mass murderer of police. A curious fact about the timing of The Matrix is it happened within a month of the Columbine massacre. Both involve trench coat-wearing terrorists. March 31, 1999, Matrix released. April 20, 1999, Columbine Massacre. I didn't know this until this week, but the investigators for Columbine made links between their actions and the film as a motivating factor. Top left, it was also linked to several other murders in the article above. I'm not agreeing outright with that position, merely bringing up that it happened. What is important is the fact that just about everything popular got that way intentionally. This means that the symbolism of taking the red pill had an original goal to it, and I'd like to understand what that was. Why did they choose Keanu Reeves to take the red pill? Often actors have symbols tied to them that make their commitment to a project represent something much larger than just a name. This is why it's important to look at the origins of any actor, as often the biggest clues will be in their first big roles. Keanu Reeves got his big break with Bill and Ted in 1989, and much like The Matrix it involved transportation by phone booth. Often celebrities have symbolism in the name. What does Keanu Reeves mean? Look it up, and you'll find that Keanu's first name is defined as a Hawaiian word cool breeze, symbolism of cool, as in that which is designed to be imitated. This fits with his most prominent description of his acting, which is acting as a mirror for the audience. Not acting but being a vessel for the audience to project themselves onto. What about Reeves? Unlike Keanu, there is no official history of this one, but I do think I know what it is. Reeves and Superman. I've only heard a name similar to that one 3 times and 2 of them played the role of Superman. A role tied to phone booths again. Neo is compared to Superman in the films as well. The first movie ends with him parodying Superman by flying away. The phone booth connection will make sense later, but before we get to that, notice that also sharing that Reeve name is Elon Reeve Musk. And just like Keanu Reeves being born in Lebanon, Musk was born in Africa. Both were born on the other side of the planet. Superman is the story of an immigrant. Symbolism much like Operation Paperclip in bringing over foreign operatives to work in the media. This is why it ties to Elon Musk. SpaceX is tied to infiltration. Operations that insert people into missions much like a team being launched to Mars. His first name is even more tied into this symbol as the original guy behind the space program defined Elon as the leader of Mars. A man who worked with Walt Disney to sell the moon as an investment to the American people. Record-breaking TV audiences. This gets to the symbolism of Superman itself. Note above the Simpsons joke with a parody of Walt Disney in 1938, same year Superman appeared, had a controversial cartoon, Nazi Supermen are our superiors. Wernher von Braun was a Nazi and many back then of his caliber were tied to Operation Paperclip, bringing in Nazis much like Superman. They come from a dying world, i.e. Nazi Germany, and then work in the media like newspapers. When we look at the basic symbol of Superman, it lines up. This is from the Christopher Reeve Superman in 1978. Note the focus on not interfering but letting your leadership stir others to media power. The whole concept of, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman. Symbol of a message traveling farther than any regular person could. Symbol of a media talking head. Note also above Superman asserting, we're all part of the same team, to law enforcement. This government connection is critical as the cape symbolizes a flag. The original Superman by the same authors was a villain, and it's clearly symbolic of Herbert Hoover. Note the Herbert name given to the author as a fake name from the original publishers. Asserting it was the name of a cousin, which just makes it less obvious that it's clearly about Herbert Hoover. The story involves someone who tries to take power, but the power runs out, and he has to go back to the breadline and be forgotten. This was during the Great Depression, something that hit on his watch, something triggered specifically in part, to remove him. Turning him from a villain into a hero is exactly the relationship of the media given from Hoover to FDR. This means when they rebuilt Superman as a hero, it was tied to the love affair the press had with FDR. With that in mind, consider the other men tied to the famous role. September 19, 1952, Adventures of Superman starring George Reeves debut. September 25, 1952, Christopher Reeve born, within 1 week. Talk about unlikely coincidences. The next guy to play the role of Superman was born the same week as the last one began, and they shared the same last name. This may be a case of a child's birth being tied to the operation. i.e. they had an op in the form of the show and a baby represented the commitment. Thus that baby as an adult naturally could pick up the same role and have a connected root symbolism. It makes it a stronger symbol each iteration by doing it generationally like this. So what op did they represent? Remember the POTUS connection. George Reeves' show began the same week as the famous Nixon checkers speech and led to the public embracing him. The speech Nixon gave was even inspired by FDR. September 23, 1952. Checkers' speech, famous speech that turned Nixon into a press darling. September 19, 1952, Adventures of Superman with George Reeves. April 28, 1958, Adventures of Superman last show after cancellation. April 28, 1958, Nixon travels overseas on Goodwill tour. May 13, 1958, Nixon motorcade attacked in Latin America. June 16, 1959, George Reeves suicide 2 days before marriage. The show ended the same day Nixon went to shore up support as VP overseas, and he was attacked. I believe the show represented press support. Press support tied to underworld connections like the mafia, blackmailing. This support switched to JFK briefly from 1958–1960, as his upset win over Nixon has long been suspected as tied to the mafia. I'm a fan of JFK, but getting a platform in the first place to speak is often tied to that world. Clearly JFK did not stay friendly with them for long, as I've shown in many other posts. When Reeves died, it was the year before Nixon lost to JFK. If it was a known symbol for him, then removing him could have been a threat to any that support him. Or it could have simply been another case of a fake death meant to send a symbol. That symbol being a loss of press support, which certainly came true. When Carter was installed, we got a new Superman. I've gone over in many posts how this was cult installation for the first time since FDR. So it fits they would bring back Superman specifically for it. Note the same people involved with Superman as Godfather. Godfather also had a major plot point about controlling the media narrative using newspaper control in it. December 12, 1974. Jimmy Carter announces candidacy for POTUS. December 12, 1974. Godfather Part 2 released. The symbol of a powerful news reporter. Flying through the airwaves. Radio/TV/newspaper. You may think this doesn't line up given Superman movies continued in the Reagan era, but remember my past decodes and how things changed. Godfather 3 was about cleaning up the corruption of the crime family, and the casting was plagued with murder and dropouts. Hollywood resisted going clean, and this is why Bush also was connected to Superman. December 1992, the release of the first part of the Death of Superman comic, and that as again a transition point as Bush lost to Clinton around that same time. But why does Reeves as a name symbolize press support? Note, I actually solved this one after the post with high confidence. Reeves symbolizes press support, but finding the root symbol is a huge help. Reeves equals origin of the most famous news story of all time. The original news story. Jack the Ripper. Reeves was the guy that kicked off the entire story by reporting a crime to give newspapers the first media sensation that went global. I'll be covering this more extensively in my next post. This explains every other Reeves as symbolic for press support, but what about Keanu Reeves? Johnny Mnemonic was a major origin of The Matrix, and both starred Keanu Reeves. Note the date of Reeve being paralyzed. May 26, 1995. Keanu Reeves stars in Johnny Mnemonic. May 27, 1995. Christopher Reeve paralyzed. I'm going to jump ahead and give the answer. I will show comms later that clarify this, but the symbolism is likely in tech. As in the switch from legacy news in print media to internet, which was going on in 1995. A new Superman. Which is more meaningful to people today? Google search results or the printed New York Times? One reaches millions, at best, once a day, the other reaches billions multiple times an hour. They could see this coming way back in 1995, but there is much more to it than just that. Keanu Reeves defined as cool wind, as in defining reality like a newspaper reporter of the time before, but how else is the power of media used? We need to dig into quite a few of his films to understand this. John, Johnny, etc. Note how many of Keanu Reeves' roles have John as the first name. Johnny Utah, Point Break, John Harker, Dracula, John, Constantine, Johnny Mnemonic, Matrix Origin, Johnny Silverhand, Terrorist Rock Star, John Wick as a legendary murderer. Note John Wick is under the same guy he was in The Matrix. Let's focus on John Wick as this was his biggest box office draw since The Matrix. Orphan, John Doe symbol, Wick like a fuse to detonate. A movie about the ultimate mass murderer to not anger. A man ignited like a fuse after his pet is killed by a Russian crime syndicate he once helped build. There are many symbols I could decode here, but I emphasize Russian because the timing of this film is crucial to reconcile. In this film, John Wick hunts down everyone that stands in the way of killing the son of a Russian crime lord he once helped install before retiring. The most important detail to unlock John Wick is his code name. Baba Yaga. Ring any bells? Probably not, but it did for me. I've been digging into comms for years now, but before I explain the comm's significance, let me bluntly lay out what this film is really about. Note that in John Wick the person protecting the Russian villain is named Victor. This film was made throughout the overthrow of the Ukraine President Viktor due to mass anger at Russia. 2014, Russian-owned Viktor overthrown by violent riots. 2014, Russian-owned Viktor killed by John Wick. Russian puppet control of Ukraine, or so it was said. The official story is the Ukraine government rejected the admission into an EU agreement in lieu of stronger Russian ties. This sparked mass protests that led to overthrow. Do you get why this is Superman symbolism? What defines mass outrage? Who drives it? Media. Consider how big Ukraine is in the news these last couple of years. These are massive changes in the world, and now we have the markers to deconstruct it. Textbook CIA overthrow of a country. I can't be sure of affiliations most of the time, but let's consider the film more. Note the song sung by the Russian head, sings a song about bad kids being taken by the boogeyman. Often the film's subtitles switch Baba Yaga with boogeyman for English speakers. Baba Yaga, nowhere I've heard that name before. The 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine was the biggest news in the world for months. Know what comms I saw trending around the same time? A game about the Baba Yaga. Not explicitly called the Baba Yaga but clearly implied and often the focus of media talking about it. Symbol of why Russia had to invade Ukraine. Based on my decodes it was likely, but not certainly, to seize things like servers and other material tied to corruption. CrowdStrike DNC servers. This is why it was interesting to note in the film John Wick the largest plot point of contention outside of being removed is control of blackmail. John Wick burns down all the money, blackmail, and leverage Russia had hidden in a church. Threats of either handing over your son, control of Ukraine, or die alongside him, riots/murder. Note a spider tattoo on the Russian leader's hand. Spider equals spy comm. John Wick takes them down. The whole movie seems like a foregone conclusion throughout it. John Wick is unstoppable, and you need to give him whatever he wants. If like in the first film, he wants to take your child, then you better let him. You can't stop him, and he will kill any in his way. What might that represent? An unstoppable killer being ignited? Why Ukraine? Consider when the USSR fell and the events leading up to it. 3 dead USSR leaders in the span of 3 years and then Chernobyl in Ukraine. January 20, 1981, Reagan inauguration. March 30, 1981, Reagan assassination attempt. November 10, 1982, USSR top Brezhnev dead. November 12, 1984, USSR top Andropov dead. March 10, 1985, USSR top Chernenko dead. April 26, 1986, Chernobyl. That Chernobyl connection may seem arbitrary, but remember the Jack Kevorkian connection above tied to Fukushima. Consider a recent Reeves Musk tweet. Elon Musk tweeting this week comedically about Ronald Reagan having replaced all birds in 1986, same year as Chernobyl, due to Marxist connections. Replacing them with spies. The disaster hit 2 months after the Russian military took over Chernobyl. I believe this was symbolic of taking control of locations and people connected to blackmail. There were still plenty of other blackmailed people in the world of course, and seeing a huge section of them suddenly go from one loyalty to another created the media push to turn Chernobyl into a scandal. In reality most disasters necessitating military intervention were terrorists being activated, not radiation. Check my nuclear posts for more, but there is a huge difference between reality and media reporting at times. Musk asserting Reagan was the one in 1986 that turned the birds into spies potentially implies that the head of the USSR, after 3 mysterious deaths of the head, had agreed to cooperate with the US military rather than the banking community. This would explain why after that point Gorbachev was far more friendly to Reagan than the ones before him. It would also explain the sudden destruction of the USSR as it was no longer beholden to the big money backers. This brings us back to the game I mentioned before as tied to the Ukraine situation. A game called Cooking Companions, showing the horrors of Baba Yaga attacking refugees from Ukraine. Note the same day the teaser game was released, Trump authorized Russian D-Class, which focuses on Ukraine. The very last thing I found for this decode was that poster. This is one of many examples of my decodes predicting what I'll see. I had no idea that Trump picture was from John Wick. I decoded October 6th as connected to John Wick through it being about Baba Yaga through the shared Ukraine/Russia comms, and now we see it come right back around and was the literal symbol that day for Ukraine D-Class. And yes, it is specifically Ukraine D-Class because that's where the DNC CrowdStrike servers were, as well as all the shenanigans with Biden and the energy sector. Burisma payments of $166,666 per month to Hunter Biden. Top of image above, and other scandals. Also, don't misunderstand the significance of this. No game or movie is a holy grail tied to unlock everything. Media comms like this exist all over the place, and it's not necessarily a direct connection to anyone involved with the operations themselves. Some comms aware people know what's coming. Perhaps they have a personal connection to the ongoing ops, or they simply have a better idea of what is going on in the bigger picture and can guess what is to come. That knowledge is valuable, and they share this information for a profit by creating media. The media released acts not as an objective measure of what is going on, but simply a perspective that may or may not align with the people actually involved in the operations themselves. It can be just as easily a com for as against, it can be exaggerated or underplayed, it can be an infinite number of things. With that in mind, it's not like Trump necessarily or specifically wanted a cannibalism horror story, but that people who knew what was going on making a marker for it. The most obvious and blunt symbol for comms awareness is a deer. DOE equals Q clearance. That's literally the mascot of the game studio. So whoever made this game likely had the perspective that there were dark secrets in Ukraine, that matches what Trump implied would be unearthed when he gave the order to D-Class. The comm therefore is someone who understood this was coming and timed their relevant game release to it. In this case, it's about the horrors going on inside the basement in Ukraine in the past. Ukraine plus past plus evil plus murder plus children plus cannibalism and others horrors. Being haunted by past actions. I noticed a comment as I dug into this connecting the game's location into a movie released the same week as The Matrix. March 19, 1999. Ravenous starring Guy Pearce, Cannibals in the Tatras Mountains. March 24, 1999. Matrix starring Carrie-Anne Mossad. September 5, 2000. Memento starring Guy Pearce and Carrie-Anne Mossad, breakthrough movie for Christopher Nolan. A movie about cannibalism, and other parallels, it starred Guy Pearce as well as The Matrix co-star Carrie-Anne Mossad. What a strange coincidence. Perhaps, but let's go back to the name connection. Remember how Keanu Reeves plays John in most of his big roles? Did you know The Matrix has Keanu Reeves as the son of a John? The name given to him by machines is Anderson and her son, symbolizing being born into role like slave being propagated generationally. As in parents sell their children into. So The Matrix is not an exception to John, it is instead symbolizing the lineage of it. The plot of Memento is for Guy Pearce to hunt down a man named John G., which he only does with the help of Carrie-Anne Mossad, and just like The Matrix, the villain is played by Joe Pantoliano. Your eyes may have caught onto the Mossad or Carrie symbol as I've covered before. Mossad and Carrie. Car plus Carrie. Driven. Carrie equals symbol of driven murderer. In Memento, Carrie-Anne Mossad is one of many that manipulates a handicapped man played by Guy Pearce to get him to violently attack their enemies. Carrie-Anne Mossad, CAM equals camera, and a plot about hunting a secret John G. over and over again. Tricking Guy Pearce into killing a man who he thinks wronged him when in fact it's just whoever Teddy decides is John G. that week. Look up the plot if this is new to you, or just watch the film as it's very well made. The game I discussed above trended several times over the year, and it was indicative of people using the com as a way to discuss the event. Most big-budget movies and games perform the same function. They detail ops going on, and most of the time they dominate the media narrative. Often the most popular media equates to the accepted com of whatever is going on. The marker for the event. This is why looking at the most popular media at any given time when cross-referenced with other media we can identify patterns that help clarify what kinds of things were going on behind the scenes. September 5, 2000. Photo plus motel movie, EU writer Memento, begins with talk of motel key, plot point involves multiple room buy. September 15, 2000. Photo plus hotel game, EU Pokemon Snap, featured in over 86k hotels as special promotion. The long delay for the EU release of the game makes sense for this game as the intention was to time it to ops. I'm not sure what specifically was going on in EU at the time to warrant it, but we can be confident it involved cameras and rent. When I look at other connected dates. July 23, 1999, Chandra X-ray Observatory launched. July 23, 1999, Superman 64 famously the worst game ever made. July 26, 1999, Pokemon Snap North America. July 28, 1999, South Park Meteor Shower Trilogy Part 3. That last one gives it away. That probably doesn't make sense if you didn't read my last post, but to quickly sum up an important point. August 13, 1997, South Park debut. August 15, 1997, GNOME Primary OS for Linux debut. December 14, 1998, GNOME's primary backer, Red Hat, sells to Intel/Netscape. December 16, 1998, Gnome's episode, South Park 17. July 14, 1999, South Park Meteor Shower Trilogy Part 1. July 13, 1999, Red Hat buys Atomic Vision United States Web Design. July 28, 1999, South Park Meteor Shower Trilogy Part 3. July 30, 1999, Red Hat buys Deluxe Computer GmbH Linux DIV Germany Computers and Software. The point if you read my last post is that South Park was originally a marker for Linux spycraft. This is why it's timed precisely to Red Hat and GNOME, Linux OS and backer. The timing of the Chandra X-ray telescope/Pokemon Snap in North America was tied to the mass tech acquisitions of Red Hat now under the banner of Intel/Netscape. These massive, over $500 million in one case, buys could improve the abilities of spying. Likely this unlocks the symbol of the Chandra X-ray as it could be about spying through computer tech to get into people's homes. Therefore the delay for the EU release of the game and the connection to buying multiple hotel rooms is likely when those ops went from purchase date to live. Purchase date equals setup. EU date is when data would begin to be catalogued overseas secretly and then rented the view out as if it were a hotel/motel. This fits Pokemon symbolism as every major entry is tied to cataloging monsters in a Pokédex. Remember though, I'm not always right and many of these are working hypothesis. Johnny Silverhand. Let's return to Keanu Reeves. All of his many roles of John, the newest one is a terrorist who lives in the head of the protagonist of Cyberpunk 2077. Trying to take over his body for much of the game. This is the symbolism of brainwashing people into becoming terrorist. A voice in the head makes bad choices look cool, hence Keanu as Cool Wind. Now throughout the game Johnny Silverhand reforms, but that's because the world is changing. All of his John roles tie into the symbolism of John Doe. Symbol of the secret hidden person with no identity that will come in unexpected and murder or terrorize. This ties into his new work Berserker. A comic he made about a man cursed with compulsion to violence. The mission being to learn the truth of his existence and end it. He also had a parody of meme with him in it. Note the missing E in Berserker just like how Reeve has 3 E's I believe certain letters are comms. E. Ties to energy. Most often symbolizing power or backing. Note the meme referenced above with Keanu Reeves eating a sandwich. May 2010 coincided with the likely lowest part of Keanu Reeves' entire career, where the only movie he made over the course of 2 years is one that he produced/starred in himself, as in he put his own money, and it bombed with $10 million spent for $2 million return. As in, he had no support at that point in time. Sandwich equals job symbolism. I went over this in a prior post, so this meme of him sad with a sandwich in 2010 perfectly fits him losing his job. Until John Wick revitalized his career. Berserker is a story Keanu made about a man looking to die, and I believe this symbol is one he supports. Removing the symbol he is tied to. Like this recent trending death battle with James Bond killing John Wick. It's the same symbol tied to cyberpunk, a role tied to being taken over by a machine to become a terrorist. The game deals with the end of that story. Elon Reeve Musk is notably so obsessed with it, he designed his vehicles to play it and made his Neuralink company bar style to it. Musk has been at the forefront of COVID-connected ops. He became the richest in the world during COVID for a reason after all. We are talking about brainwashed terrorists after all, and if you check my COVID posts you know that entire operation with tracking worldwide was about fixing a world that has long been held hostage by threat of brainwashed puppets. When I looked at his Berserker in my timeline I noticed it tied into March 3, 2021, Berserker Keanu Reeves comic Kickstarter 1.4 million. March 3, 2021, China mandates anal swab COVID tests for all visitors despite psychological pain. The Kickstarter he made hitting so big is symbolic of accepting what was to come, I bet. All of these comms are part of a conversation in a way, the movies/games various parties asserting their position by creating a piece of media laying it out. Cyberpunk 2077 was released right next to the first sequel of Bill and Ted after decades. Note the title Face the Music. Consequences for one's past actions, both game and movie star Keanu Reeves as a rock star. This is tied to the comms in Cyberpunk, effectively symbolism of anyone involved in that world being defunded and taken down. No longer being used as a way to protect themselves, as everyone came together and agreed that anyone engaging in it would be the target. Though I can say that it helps to understand the symbols themselves. The origin of Cyberpunk is tied to the same month Macintosh launched. An ad with a message about being spied on by Big Brother. I've gone over Apple in many posts as their early machines with the $666 price tag among other reasons were tied to early tech spying. They weren't alone in this by any measure, but they flourished, and this is why digging into them is critical. Note above the actress in the Super Bowl Mac commercial had one other famous role. That of Nikita, in an Elton John video about Russia. Falling in love during the time of Gorbachev. This was after his 3 predecessors died within 3 years. The meaning seems to have been trying to court Gorbachev away from Reagan during the time of Chernobyl. This does not appear to have worked. Anyway, the connection here between her 2 roles seems to be of a larger global push involving technology. It was a complicated war I go into in several posts tied to Mossad and CIA and involved among other companies the destruction of Atari. Cyberpunk has its origins in that technological warfare. Its most recent edition with Cyberpunk 2077 begins with the player working for a man who murders a high-ranking political official right at the start. He then forces the player through leverage to murder family members of someone that is upset with his actions. These are the precise kinds of things being shut down right now worldwide. The symbolism of the early game. Note the name of this lunatic ordering the player. Jenkins, the symbol of an idiot that rushes into death. May 11, 2005. Leroy Jenkins meme aired, idiot gets friends killed by rushing into battle. May 10, 2005. Protest demonstration of 1K people for release of prisoners. May 11, 2005. Protest size grows to 4K strong for release of prisoners. May 12, 2005. Small group in Uzbek splintered from giant months-long 10K strong protest attack police building in attempt to rescue a prisoner leading to May 13, 2005. 700 protesters murdered by Uzbek government. Government blames Western powers for planning a coup and becomes closer aligned with Russia for protection. Leads to calls for regime change. May 14, 2005. Thousands begin attacking guards and torching police officers as regime change demands are made. Once again dealing with creating riots to overthrow governments. I've decoded other Jenkins with the same symbol, but let's move on. So that answers a few questions perhaps, but we can learn a lot more with deep dives on the films. After all, how does any of this symbolism tie into Bill and Ted, which seems about as anti-violence as you can get in a film? Note the choices of wording about history being rewritten by two guys who can't spell. This was within a month of the internet being invented, and I believe that's root symbol at play. The telephone symbolism being a perfect symbol for going online. Usenet was a thing since 1980, and it had been growing exponentially for universities. This ties into the film as they are trying to pass a history test by using a telephone line to visit various sites. Effectively symbolism of copy and pasting from Wikipedia to turn into school. Consider the first issue of Superman. Consider the power the press has over reality. Chasing who they define as bad, defining reality itself. In the first issue he forces his way into a newspaper job, threatens people all throughout, is called the most dangerous man alive, the devil himself, forces a confession to get one person executed instead of the one that was convicted in a court of law. Makes sure nobody talks about who really made the news and so on. When it does get said, it's laughed off as conspiracy of a drunkard. This issue of creating conspiracy as a label as a way to hide a conspiracy is key. Laughing off a conspiracy, this is the answer to Keanu Reeves in Bill and Ted. Consider Keanu Reeves in the early 90s playing the ultimate idiot in his breakthrough role with Bill and Ted, and much like Pauly Shore. Famously idiotic, and unlike Keanu Reeves, it was a role he played that role IRL 24/7 rather than just in film. I mention this connection because June 1, 1990, Total Recall, origin of red pill symbol. Doctor plugs man into machine that puts to sleep and kills. June 3, 1990, Totally Pauly, debut of Pauly Shore. Total Recall / Totally Pauly. Same timeframe and extremely similar spelling. Purposefully acting idiotic to disguise comms. It's frustratingly childish at times, but a strength of symbolism comms is in how it hides in plain sight using that blind spot of people. Sounding like a fool is the price of entry. Totally Pauly equals TP symbol for cleaning up excrement. Total Recall is the title, but in the film it's spelled REKALL. The incorrect spelling symbolizes the disinfo pumped into head. Moreover, note Pauly Shore debut tied to a music video about love for a girl named Lisa, the future of America. I haven't cracked that many names, but Lisa is one name I understand fully. A common symbol to define computer surveillance by a family. I've connected it to tons in other posts, but in this post I finally got to the root. The symbol tied to Apple Macintosh's high-end computer, that was what I originally tied it to, but this week I learned there was a huge scandal that had lots of media coverage, as in comms, involved Steve Jobs' daughter being named Lisa. Notably, he denied they were related publicly until 1987 and fought any attempts to connect the two even after a paternity test. 1976, first Apple Mac released $666.66. 1978, Steve Jobs' daughter Lisa Brennan born. 1978, Apple Lisa project begins. Plus 9 years. 1987, Steve Jobs acknowledges for the first time Lisa is his 9-year-old daughter. 1987, Simpsons premieres with Lisa Simpson as the smart 8-year-old daughter of a nuclear power plant worker. The symbol fits my past decodes of The Simpsons as it involved family surveillance and brainwash. The computer being used was a revolution in how low-level comms-aware families could interact with people that might employ them covertly. Most obviously in the form of MK and blackmail potential, but also for the random news of the day when some story pops out of nowhere with a comms purpose. When it came time for the technology to go to the masses, that information had to be controlled. Thus feigned idiocy became the name of the day. Let's get into the films. Bill and Ted 1. First film begins with talk of how great the future is, that even the dirt is clean, as I believe the point is in hiding dirt. Keeping idiots on a specific path, otherwise the basis of our society will be in danger. How does that make sense? Consider the basic plot of learning about historical figures. What do they know? They know that Napoleon was a short dead dude, as well as a bunch of other nonsense. The meaning here is with the creation of the internet. Note how they portray Napoleon as short when in fact he was above average height. It was British propaganda that labeled him as short. Thus the film exists to guide the early internet, which could otherwise go down a historically accurate path. Every historical figure presented in the film is presented as a cartoon caricature as well as everything else. It's about keeping the masses dumb. Keeping idiots on the path of idiocy as they gain the gift of the internet with infinite information. Seeding disinfo from the start of the internet. Instructions on how to handle the creation of websites. The ones that get algo pumped are the ones that sabotage themselves and act as though stoned. Or many other ways. This is connected to MK Ops because controlling information is critical. Preventing Reeves from joining the military is the goal. Oats Military Academy. This ties into their band name, Wild Stallions, making a horse that eats oats. Military recruitment removal. That is literally the plot of the film in keeping him away from joining Oats military. The demon horse of DIA with the secret bunker glowing red eyes of Terminator, killed the sculptor a year after Bill and Ted. Oats Military Academy might be a reference to Warren Oates as they enlisted in the military after dropping out of high school. The exact same scenario of Ted in the film, they also died young by heart attack and were married to a Teddy before switching to a Turner. This explains why instead of John we get a Ted here. It also may explain why in Memento John G's nickname is Teddy. Oates' death coincided with the first death by video game, events I decoded in prior posts as pushes against the US military. The precise goal here is in keeping people uneducated. Not learning anything in high school, not the military, and not the internet. This is critical for MK assets, and might be why for the girlfriend we had someone named as Trigger, born the same day as Rosemary's Baby. Famous movie from a pedophile about sacrificing a wife for fame. But that could be coincidence. It's one of those things where I keep finding patterns but can't find the right one to prove or disprove it outright, so I'm forced to just say, maybe. What isn't a coincidence is George Carlin's possibly most famous role as the original Saturday Night Live host. A show that began with jokes about 2 heart attacks and then followed with George Carlin talking about sacrifices, followed by the next skit asking the viewers to contemplate being murdered and replaced. All of this was right after Nixon was impeached, and it was part of the scare tactics keeping people from talking. Blackmail comms are all over these early shows. A skit with the impossible truth talks of a future with age of consent lowered from 18 to 7, which leads to business booms. Andy Kaufman singing Mighty Mouse symbolism for recording. Symbolism of puppets and quite a bit more. Learning the truth at 17/Q. Back to the film, the crux of the story is about historical disinfo, and to that point they begin asking random people history. Which leads to the original host of Saturday Night Live coming in from a phone booth. Just like today, using the internet to get the answers. Only back then you had to use a phone dial-up. The very first historical figure being Napoleon. A focus on his height. Napoleon hitches a ride to the present in the same way that copy and pasting an article about him would be part of the report. All of the historical figures act like cartoon characters, as do Bill and Ted. As any dumb idea they have works to solve whatever problem arises. There is no pushback to them being dumb, and in fact every dumb impulse they have is reinforced and encouraged. Going to Billy the Kid time and getting drunk. Screwing up a card game but somehow through idiocy coming out the hero of the outlaw. They impress Socrates with idiocy and album lyrics. They instantly get princesses to fall in love with them as they bumble their way through. No guards. And they just put on a suit of armor like Scooby-Doo and begin playing around. No matter what happens, it just works out. Any pushback or threat is trivial. It seeds the idea that stupidity is a viable life path. As they escape a pig, ham communication is shown, followed by sheep following, that transition into them going to the future. A future where they are worshipped as gods. The entire foundation of the future existing on their philosophy of doing whatever. This is critical because the whole point is in embracing this stupidity for communications, ham, and getting the sheep to follow. They give the infinite wisdom of "party on, dudes," which is followed by Napoleon being treated like a small child with children. Getting a piggy award for eating ice cream, which he proudly places next to his military awards. Do you get how condescending this is? Treating people like babies. Though there is another layer to this, but we'll get to that later. So then they get Sigmund Freud, not Freud but Freud, and lure Genghis Khan with Twinkies. Then after a few more they have every historical figure chew gum, which they combine together to fix the antenna. Bubble-blowing comms are about funding stock bubbles. Which I take here to mean that people online that support the disinfo by pushing these will be the sites that get pumped with traffic. It leads to the presentation beginning. Getting the disinfo right is one step, and now that it's funded, it's time to push it to the public, which the presentation represents. Only problem is Napoleon went to Waterloo, and as a song about sex plays, Napoleon jumps into various water pipes while grabbing children as he goes. The symbol here of water pipes connects to the internet, but there seems to be a few other layers going on here as well that I'm not sure about. Anyway, the other historical figures are trying to seduce girls at the mall. As well as decapitating mannequins. As Beethoven, pronounced beef in the film, plays many keyboards. Symbolism of typing as each disinfo is propagated to the public. This is why a mall was chosen. The one thing everyone knows about Freud is that he associates every act with a mother complex. They get arrested, but as with before, all solutions are childish. As they find they can will anything to happen at any moment simply by deciding that in the future they will go back in time to set up whatever is necessary. So then they can go on to the presentation, and it's exactly as devoid of critical thinking as one would expect based on what we've seen. Associating Socrates with Ozzy Osbourne acting as his interpreter. Which is the point, having an idiot interpret intelligent thought. Effectively turning everything Socrates was in history to be about him loving baseball and other billiards. Genghis Khan loves Twinkies and Napoleon just talks about waterslides. Which brings to the final speaker, Abraham Lincoln, who butchers a famous speech of his with disinfo for score and 7 minutes ago. Score equals 20. And then talking about partying on. Wild Stalins, misspelling symbol just like on the cover. History being rewritten as promised. The foundation of future society. Future in this case being internet, and society being the comms-aware people funded to lead the populace with disinfo. The goal being to create an environment online of the right type. Disinfo, but not in such a way that hampers comms. In fact, the cartoon exaggerations complement comms. That's the first film. This is about presenting disinformation. One famous song released around the time of The Matrix, the symbolism of that Backstreet Boys song involves asserting they want it that way, while also saying you never want to hear someone else say they want it that way. Note the lyrics of Tell Me Why. You ask the internet, tell me why, and you get disinformation, or at the very least a hidden agenda. Speaking around in circles as the population with no tools at their disposal can do nothing but accept what is told to them as gospel. In past posts I connected this to the origins of Wikipedia and Reddit, as both are designed with these principles. March 31, 1999, Matrix. April 12, 1999, Backstreet Boys, I Want It That Way. April 14, 1999, South Park, Spontaneous Combustion. May 4, 1999, Smash Mouth, All-Star. Note Smash Mouth lyrics starting with someone dumb and then saying, "What's wrong with taking the backstreets? This was right as Backstreet Boys, I Want It That Way," was surging, and both songs became incredibly popular. They fit together as songs, and it all ties into The Matrix and other things released around that time. The issue being how to communicate around objective reality. The South Park episode when contrasted with the two songs helped clarify the issue. All-Star and the episode both deal with the world being on fire, global warming, looking stupid and other parallels. Flatulence is a symbol of saying something taboo, and the concept here is that for things taboo being said to say it in a confusing or otherwise non-educational way. Much like casting Keanu Reeves in The Matrix defining cool and giving something close to objective reality and symbolism with the machine world, but marrying it with hyper-violence. Anyway, the Bill and Ted sequel is actually far more transparent than the original for meaning and includes many more important pieces, so hopefully you can get through another one of these. Bill and Ted 2. The sequel begins with a man upset in the future that the world is led by the idiocy of Bill and Ted. That he will stop them from reaching the masses by going back in time. Meanwhile, Rufus is conducting a class where he introduces a spiritual leader from the founder of Faith No More. He gives bad advice to the students and then the villain appears with his own versions of Bill and Ted. His secret weapon being a robot Bill and Ted. This is the same symbol for the actual Bill and Ted as it's all about programming, but in this case it's using the same weapon against them. This is why he's presented as the teacher of Rufus. It's made more clear several times in the film as they are programmed. So their goal is to stop the message of Bill and Ted by replacing them. Bill and Ted don't understand how they are supposed to be the biggest band when they are terrible, but then that's the point. Idiotic is the goal. So despite them being idiots they get a shot because it's destiny. We learn later that they only got their shots because Rufus is this woman in disguise. The concept of programming idiots is a big one, and at this point they are in debt, and if they don't become big stars they suggest they may sell some more blood. This is an important symbol to go through. So important I'm going to give it its own section. Blood Drive / Beavis and Butthead / Harvester. This symbol of selling blood is the very first episode of Beavis and Butthead, a show airing at around the same time as Bill and Ted with Two Idiots. The short answer is this is about selling unwanted relatives, but it's more than that. Though I say this is the first episode, actually. Just like The Simpsons before it became a full show it existed as shorts, the first of which is Frog Baseball. Begins with inbred Jeds, homemade cartoons, symbolism for family made. Then this sequence. A man asserting, "I guarantee it." Cop Rock at 9, flipped 6. Then I found Thigh Master, it's easy to squeeze. Transitions to Beavis and Butthead. This is symbolism for Beavis and Butthead being the solution to flips. How? The symbol is of using brainwashed idiots as threats to quiet anyone. Read it again. I guarantee it equals this will happen. Cop Rock at 9, flipped 6, equals cops will turn people against you and get evidence. Then I found Thigh Master, it's easy to squeeze equals the way to fix this is by using threats. Transitions to Beavis and Butthead. Equals the solution is in purchasing MK Ultra to make an example. How do they do this? Well, that's the other part of the show. Frog in boiling water symbolism. They are conditioned to go from playing with firecrackers to killing frogs to killing an expensive dog owned by someone. To be continued, and the dog screams as they beat the dog to death with a baseball bat. Miss Higgins' poodle equals a child / loved one of someone rich being attacked by psychopaths when they are most vulnerable. Columbine killers began with animals, and it's a way to condition them to escalate until killing people is the same as going from a frog to a dog. Thus this show acts not just as a calm for creating psychopaths but as a warning on how easy it is to achieve this goal. Frog in boiling water equals slowly escalating. The I guarantee it part after Cop Rock and with Beavis and Butthead as the solution. That programmed psychopaths are the answer to people turning over evidence. That just a small show with a psycho making an example scares everyone in line. We've seen this in tons of comms until now, as it was the status quo for a long time. The origin being liquid television. Local art projects, representing shopping around sold relatives. 2 shows became huge after it. Beavis and Butthead being one of them. It infamously inspired a kid to burn down his own home as well as other tragedies. So it works not just as comms but conditioning itself. Same-day Mortal Kombat for this particular episode. I couldn't find many of these shorts online anywhere, but one I did find was the set of Joe Normal. Symbol for someone in denial pretending everything is normal while their world is madness. Everyone around them driving them into insanity. Likely victims would be conditioned to identify with various symbols like these. Perhaps a joke of being normal becomes their nickname, and just how abnormal they are is magnified over time. The point is, Beavis and Butthead selling blood is equivalent to selling a relative into a system to brainwash a killer. This ties into the movie strongly, as the evil programmed robots try and kill the cat with the telephone booth. Symbol of killing a comms-aware person. This was during the period of time when threats and murders were common. Being bystanders was terrifying to many in that world, and so these comms are addressing the danger. Note the reference to Wayne's World with not. Symbol of Michael Myers as Wayne. Which ties into the next scene showing William Shatner, original face of Michael Myers, wanting a phaser gun. They drive the 2 good Bill and Teds and murder them. They then say, "Station," which is a phrase that keeps getting said and will continue to. It makes no sense at all but will eventually have a plot point. Just like the first film, they have childish solutions that always worked. Thus far the only thing that has ever presented an issue to their childish plans always working is themselves as robots. The first film also had a sex focus briefly. Having a hot stepmom bend down in front of him giving him view of cleavage. Followed by the father having sex in his room. Note nuclear symbol above. Symbol of early internet bringing pornography. That's just a guess, and even if true it's clearly not the primary comm. Just like in the first film there is a focus on the cleavage of the stepmom, only now they are dead and get sent to hell. So like most things a childish solution works for them in this. Playing games with death. This, playing games, will be important when we get to the station, comm. They make death their subordinate by beating him at games and then go to heaven and meet God. God also says, station, is the solution to the programmed Bill and Ted. And they meet, station, there's a big hint to the meaning above on the right. Even pointed out like that, I doubt you'll see it right away. Read that image again when I give the answer in a bit. So station plays charades with the answer being, Smokey and the Bandit, a film I decoded in a prior post as symbolizing the transfer of MK information. And they want, station, to build good robot versions of Bill and Ted. So while the evil robot them try and run over cats, they get busy building good robot versions of themselves with, station. This is where the symbolism becomes very specific. Station. Bill and Ted tell them to stop playing games, and then the 2 station monsters merge into one to build robot idiots. So what could this mean? It's actually a great example that I want you to pay close attention to. So the official story is station is a typo from a deleted scene. The true story though? June 1991, Sony PlayStation add-on for SNES revealed at CES show. July 1991, Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. It's very precise. This film was the marker for a project that never finished materializing. It was cancelled one day after it went public, and within a month the film which had markers for it was released. This is a great example because we know the entire history of this thing, and we can see how the comms reflected this despite it being cancelled. Obviously the film was already made at that point with less than a month to go. This helps clarify the relationship between Sony and Nintendo as being once friendly and then hostile. It also helps us understand due to the film itself the motivations of the parties. There is also other connections like 1988 origin of the device as well, which is when a song about brainwashing was released called Battle Stations. Note the "like a laser beam" lyric. CD-ROM technology uses a laser as different from a cartridge, so that further clarifies the connection and that the album was a marker for what was going on between the two. It fits being used with Keanu Reeves as his symbolism is "cool wind" plus Superman. Sony being music, wind. As well as the next defined, cool. Anyway, we can see the point ties into programming, that the programmed MK kids were something the comms-aware people at large didn't like being at the mercy of. These hit jobs had terrified a large amount of the populace, and so comms like this suggest moving in a direction that's less problematic. When you view it that way, it is suggesting a less evil alternative to making monsters. Though I may be giving too much credit. Eventually Sony would take PlayStation and make PlayStation, or PSX as it's commonly called, and release it the same day as Sega's 32X. December 3, 1994, 32X Japan Bomb Console. December 3, 1994, PSX released Japan huge success. A system commonly viewed as the beginning of the end of Sega. The first flop of many, as I suspect this was an intentional sabotage to allow Sony to dominate. Sony was much larger than Nintendo, and so when they decided to get into the console race they went in fully. As we can see from the symbolism, that entire industry is understood to be tied to conditioning. Note they literally have game controllers to control the robot versions of themselves. There is no fight, they simply destroy the evil versions within seconds of seeing them. Instantly fixes the problem. Leaving only the guy that programmed them to hunt the wrong people. Creating programmable assets. Taking over the media with them. However, through various illogical time travel logic, he gets arrested because they simply went back in time and set up various ways to trap him. Which leads to them getting their debut as a band, as the person running the venue is one of the future people in disguise. Because artificially promoted idiocy is the way of things. They then use time travel to get years of practice, but this is an illogical plot point that contradicts the established rule set. That their time is always tied to the present of San Dimas. Yeah, I know, the point is to be dumb, so that fits perfectly, actually. Band with the good robot us's and station. Death on their side as control over MK assets. And world watches wild equals www symbol. As this is still about the internet. And about media control. Which includes the video game/tech industry. ESRB. It's worth mentioning that Nintendo pushed more against hyper-violence than the other companies. Mortal Kombat hyper-violence was the origin of ESRB. Another game tied to these hearings is Harvester, on the top left, the most violent game presented that I'm aware of. Game involves human sacrifice and allows murdering of children and much else. When I dug into that one. October 1, 1996, Harvester/Cult of the Harvest Moon PC. August 9, 1996, Harvest Moon, famously non-combat RPG SNES. Just like the PlayStation was announced at CES, Harvester was as well, though it was released. Harvester timeframe, tied to Harvest Moon equals RPG with no fighting, the relationship is symbolically opposed. The point of one failing and one succeeding is the direction being taken in 1996 by parties. Harvester was also tied to ESRB hearings. They needed hyper-violence to justify ratings, so they created it. They did the same thing when the movie ratings began. Another blood drive com. Remember, this was during the same time as the Beavis and Butthead blood drive com, so this gives us more clarity on the symbolism. In context, if he doesn't kill others/get blood, his own blood is taken. Becoming a sacrifice or being thrown away. Hooked up to serial killer goggles, which explains everything in the game being twisted and trying to incite murder. He literally performs a Mortal Kombat fatality and then goes on to become a serial killer as he is hooked up to a matrix-like machine and brainwashed. This concept of violence/threat was tied to the changing of power in the Bush to Clinton transition. Clinton won due to threats destroying Bush. This is why it was Doomsday that kills Superman. Doom sound familiar? December 7, 1993, New York Long Island rail shooting. December 7, 1993, Donald Trump asserts he will re-evaluate life due to the Long Island rail shooting. Switches from Ivanka to Marla Maples. December 10, 1993, Doom released, ID software. December 14, 1993, Aurora, Colorado for dead mass shooting. One of many comms around this time about the transition was a film called Dracula. Keanu Reeves also starred in Dracula. Right after he played in Wildest Tylons. Symbol of rejecting Keanu Reeves in this one, but read my vampire post for more on that. It appears to have been a brief peace between sides as disarming of MK grenades took place. Not like today with full military commitment worldwide, but instead with Epstein, which is a long story. Check my Epstein's baby mandate post. Course this pause in hostility didn't last long. Like when the Whitewater scandal exploded. July 19, 1993, Don't Ask Don't Tell announced by Clinton barring openly gay. July 20, 1993, Vince Walker Foster death, Clinton Deputy Counsel death tied to HRC Whitewater start. January 6, 1994, Nancy Kerrigan attacked by Tonya Harding scheme. January 6, 1994, Harvester first shown at public CES becomes major media topic, distraction. January 12, 1994, facing mounting pressure, Clinton requests a special prosecutor. January 12, 1994, Eckhart confesses Tonya Harding's role against Kerrigan. Tonya narrative takes over mainstream media. Symbol of a distraction with Tonya Harding dominating media just as Whitewater heats up. Ice equals Whitewater symbol itself fitting the Tonya connection. Symbol of Harding being the most famous scandal before Watergate, the Teapot Dome scandal, which is forever tied to Warren Harding. The Tonya Harding Kerrigan was a big attempt to distract from Whitewater. This is why the SNL timed with Whitewater explanation may be a good lesson on how to use SNL comms. March 12, 1994, Nancy Kerrigan SNL, intro involves Whitewater murder HRC arrest and then switches to Nancy Kerrigan. Symbol of one covering up the other. Potentially. I have a new hypothesis now about the Lewinsky scandal. I decoded in prior posts that clearly it was joint operation of Mossad/CIA, and I thought it was akin to a token of friendship between the two that they shared the blackmail. I've seen that in other places, but then I noticed this. March 31, 1996, Getting Away with Murder closes at Broadhurst NYC after 17/Q performances. March 31, 1996, Lewinsky has sex with Bill Clinton using cigar. This could be coincidence, but when I consider the murder of Walker around that time, it suggests that some Clinton ally activated an MK proxy to take out someone that was snooping in the wrong places. Perhaps this was against the defined rules and so a penalty was thought up in the form of the Lewinsky scandal. Perhaps a scandal in exchange for not pursuing Whitewater. Just a guess on that one. I can see some pieces, but I have to fill in major gaps at times when it comes to motives. Let's switch to a new find this week. Updates 1, Philadelphia section. Philadelphia tied to money changes. Financial crisis. Each time the Phillies won, it coincided with a market crash. Philadelphia equals funding symbolism. They all share one thing in common, which is switching from one party to another as a result of economic crisis. FDR massive win, Reagan landslide historic, and Obama won big as well, which historically is impressive given there was no third party this time to suck up numbers like Perot did both times for Clinton. Course they had McCain throw the race and had all kinds of other tricks, but he held all three houses, which is a big deal, for 2 years. Other examples. Fresh Prince of Bel-Air focused on Philadelphia and Phil Banks taking him in. Phil/Philadelphia. Though when it comes to Fresh Prince the symbol isn't so much money as it is race. The brainwashing isn't just along age/class but also race. 1989 Will Smith Fresh Prince. 1988 Bill and Ted. When I looked up the most popular episode, it had this description. Talked about police brutality toward black people long before conversations about this unfairness was commonplace. It's harrowing to watch the moment a young man realizes the world is stacked against him because of the color of his skin. Read that quote carefully. It talked about racial injustice towards blacks long before it was commonplace, because that was the point, an introduction to the push. Psychological programming. Will equals expressing the future tense. Smith equals forging into mold. Though that's just my guess, as name comms can be tricky. Either way, it seems the intent for him. With Philadelphia/Phil Banks as a funding symbol, the lyrics of Born and Raised puts the context of the song as symbolic of funding that which Will Smith symbolizes. The goal may have been to make the USA fall in love with Will Smith. That's why he had so many movies with him as a sympathetic hero. It's why he's a family-friendly rapper. A bridge to racial propaganda for those just starting out who would otherwise recognize it as poison and reject. Instead, he goes down easy. That way, when we see him encounter racism, like in the most popular episode of Fresh Prince, it becomes akin to a close friend or relative being shown it. The show achieved this, and several of his movies did as well. The concept being imitation, we imitate what we see and make it a part of us. It reminds me of the band most associated with the Columbine killers. KMFDM. They have a song called Light, as in easy to swallow, an introduction for kids. Note the lyrics begin with blind and lead to open your eyes after swallowing KMFDM. Note the KFMDM song included in Johnny Mnemonic also focuses on being woken up after sleeping. Same symbolism we've been going over. This ties into Johnny Mnemonic. Letting someone store data inside your head. The soundtrack of Johnny Mnemonic is by KFMFDM. Their most famous song by them is about a Superman with excrement for brains destroying the state. Just like The Matrix, they are also tied to Columbine, but even more so. May 26, 1995. Johnny Mnemonic featuring KMFDM, movie released in Japan first and catered to audience. May 26, 1995. Japan executes the murderers Eiji Fujioka and Osaka. May 26, 1995. Ken Griffey injury broke left wrist epic catch. May 27, 1995. Elitch's theme park Denver opened. May 27, 1995. Christopher Reeves Superman Christ Horse VA broke neck paralyzed shoulders down. March 31, 1999. Matrix released USA, Trenchcoat Mass Murderers. April 20, 1999. Columbine Massacre Colorado High School, Trenchcoat Mass Murders. April 20, 1999. KMFDM Adios, features driving car crash iconography. Some of those connections, like the executions, may mean nothing. Ken Griffey is interesting because of the whole Japanese/Russian connection. In past posts I go over extensively Nintendo owning the team he played for during this time. Some, though, like the eyes opening symbolism pattern, is clearly meaningful, and the timing is unlikely as coincidence given the connection KMFDM has to not just Johnny Mnemonic, but Beavis and Butthead, Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat and others. Being the favorite band of the Columbine killers is quite a distinction, and it lends credence to the idea that they were a bridge to a desired perspective. Street Fighter I already decoded as being key to the removal of H.W. Bush through the rioting in 1992. So it ties it all together. With all that in mind, let's actually get into the Matrix origin film. Johnny Mnemonic. Movie begins with a discussion of 2021 Internet, that the most important thing in this world is secure moving of data preventing leaks. That this data is moved in the heads of certain individuals. Defined mnemonic, symbolism of memory techniques, trying to get someone to remember something. Fits not just for the plot with people acting as hard drives but as the symbol of brainwashing. Conditioning ideas into heads. The film begins after Johnny gets dumped by a girl who pretends to get ice on the 17th/Q with a discussion of removing an implant dug into Johnny's head. Carrying around 80 gigs and using a doubler for 160 gigs, he takes on a new job. He arrives at his client's place and calls his equipment double cheese, anchovies, which I believe is a nod to the memory doubling. Which is a minor point, but as we are dealing with symbols, this could represent cheese as symbolic of data. I'm always trying to get as much precision as I can with commonly used symbols. Cheese has been used in places I've decoded to define photographs/videos, so general data makes sense too. The whole moon is made out of cheese fits into that as a common way to define a secret location. Anyway, so he works for new clients who are watching Casablanca, a film about a dangerous escape. This complements the plot of needing to get far away ASAP. They use television as the lock to code massive amounts of information into Johnny Mnemonic's brain, overloading it with data which in 2 to 3 days will kill him if he doesn't get help. That's the actual plot. These are people who worked for a major pharmaceutical company. Pharma drugging, mixed with information overload. 17 degrees temperature of water/info. He begins having a psychological breakdown due to too much information. Outside everyone is being murdered. Johnny gets through security on flight 86 gate 113. 86 is a symbol for killing and 13 is bad luck. We find next the Pharmacom boss lost his child who was trying to reform things. Symbol of someone being forced into evil, which is notable as later he empowers Johnny. This whole using of MK subjects. You can make an argument to justify anything no matter how evil it is. There's always a reason why people do what they do, and in their own minds it's justified. Pharmacom, pharmacy, and Johnny. Remember that John comes from before, and in fact the very first major film of Keanu Reeves. A film with a focus on doing drugs and a murderer named John who is friends with Reeves. Note the story is based on a real crime of a girl that was killed and ignored, with the crime going unreported for days. Additionally, the actor that played John in this one was born on the same day as the sentencing for presidential assassination attempt. Note the name Roe plus Buck, Roe being Roe versus Wade abortion and Buck being money. Being paid to sacrifice a child symbolism. I'd need to watch the movie, but I suspect I'd find some comms with Keanu Reeves driving John. Johnny is overloaded with information and someone is tasked to drive him to his next location. This leads to his co-star Molly Millions in the original. This character is worth discussing. Note the talk of her being a prostitute. In the original source material, this was a character that worked as someone who would be put unconscious and men would have sex with. I'll return to her at the end of the section for more expansion. She also confirmed Johnny was disposed of after the events of the story, which clarify the role as disposal asset. She recognizes how messed up in the head he is. We see Pharmacom head talking to a person we later learn is Johnny's mother in the computer, telling him to deal with defectors that will kill him otherwise. This is precisely what MK is for, as we went into the Beavis and Butthead section. Remember the sequence. I guarantee it, followed by Cop Rock at 9, flipped 6 until they get Thigh Master to squeeze yourself. Yourself as relating to a major corporation removing the fat. Using idiots brainwashed to remove defectors. How does the data get inside Johnny's head? He had to remove all childhood memories. Symbolism for a traumatic repressed childhood. Remember that his mother was directly contacting with Pharmacom's head in the prior scene and telling him to remove/murder his second in command. Stolen data equals information that can be given to cops, the symbol of someone doing something illegal and trying to keep ops secret. Removing childhood as in the abuse and repressed memory that comes with it to create a conditioned psychopath. A suggestive state is created, and then he is hooked into the global net. Meanwhile, the pharmacy hires a church for assassination. Johnny meets with a doctor who presents Johnny with the idea that his new friend will soon die if a cure isn't found for the black shakes. I mentioned before the first scene had a woman dump Johnny pretending to get ice. Well, here we have Ice-T. A man whose famous songs include drug pushing. So he spies the approaching church hitman as we learn that Johnny's mother is a ghost in the machine. Drivers of MK subjects' fake deaths become ghosts, and that seems to be the case here as well. The two groups meet due to a man named Spider, symbolism of spying, who agrees to drive Johnny. Random images from the TV as the code equals how comms are communicated, activation, etc., done that way to remove any possibility of tracing to source. How does he drive Johnny? He tells Johnny that inside his head is the cure that can save his new friend's life. Using handlers to motivate driven subjects who are brainwashed into believing a fantasy. Fits like Total Recall and Matrix, absorbing a power fantasy of importance if they kill others and or sacrifice themselves. So they meet ICE at a place they built. Heaven out of straight world junk equals trash people thrown away by relatives. A dolphin, clicking symbolism equals TV remote/computer, the helper. And all data has to be looped through this clicker. A strange arbitrary rule but symbolic of a firewall to protect. Neo has to hack his own brain as the final step. Symbol of someone making the final decision to activate themselves. The point isn't driving someone to commit murder but making sure nobody involved in the driving is implicated. So have to get the subject to decide for themselves to act in the way desired. Hence all the fantasy of being a savior for many if they can take a chunk out of a major corporation. As in going to specific people in charge of it and murdering them. So they have a finale with discussion of the pharmacy keeping diseases around to profit from them rather than cure, which is certainly something many suspect, and justification for acts of terrorism as well as removing people who try and make positive changes. The dolphin cooks the preacher, Johnny hacks his own mind, and ICE broadcasts the footage. The final part of the film reveals the ghost in the machine to be his mother. Pharmacom goes up in flame, terrorism. His brain cooked but shown as alive, though as we know from later literature he was killed right after this. Let's return to Molly Millions, the co-star in Johnny Mnemonic, a character who is put to sleep and taken advantage of. This reminds me of another Max Headroom. Sex is a large part of Ops, another piece of cyberpunk history being Max Headroom. Most prominent as a persona Eminem took on. The original story being a talking head on TV named Carter, who was disposed of by corporate, and then he comes back in the machine. A famous hacking event used it as well. Notice all the talk he gives of sex with relatives and atomic bombs. Symbolism for blackmail, and I suspect the meaning originated from Jimmy Carter being blackmailed detonated as big companies decided he was bad for business. This fits as they were going against Reagan in the 80s, the one that reaped the electoral benefit from it. This is why Carter inexplicably revived the draft and other insane choices. It gave Reagan a landslide. Moreover, when I dug into Max Headroom I noticed a few points that support this. Note they chose someone born the same day Sputnik was destroyed. Symbol in both cases of high technology meeting crash and destruction. Sputnik, as I've decoded in prior posts, is about controlling assets through blackmail. This is why Leave It to Beaver was timed to it, a show famous for being wholesome but with a name that references a common sexual slang far more prominent as sex slang back then. The juxtaposition being appearing clean while being blackmailed. I've already decoded it in other posts, but this week I was researching. This week I noticed the most popular and expensive episode, In the Soup. An episode with a clear symbol. Note the mother presenting the hot soup. October 4, 1957. Sputnik launched. October 4, 1957. Leave It to Beaver debut, It's a Small World, Disney Around the World Plus Kid symbol. May 5, 1961. First human space flight. May 6, 1961. Leave It to Beaver, In the Soup, most expensive and popular episode. Meaningful because it was timed to the first space launch, the very next major milestone after Sputnik, which further cements the connection. Note some of the dialogue. Show begins by talking about spraying trees for bugs. As in listening devices. Throws a party which involves breaking records if necessary, and then has Beaver fall in a cup of soup during a party. Ends with him talking about how it was like he was naked and everyone was watching. As everyone was watching Alan Shepard. The meaning here is that people involved in these operations have to keep their mouths closed about it, and so that requires blackmail. It's explained to comms-aware people what's really going on through media like this. If it didn't exist this way, every person in that world would have to keep their own history rather than simply have the necessary markers to understand it. When you think of it like that, all of these comms allow understanding, not to mention bragging of involvement. These blackmail videos are done at friendly houses where the child is sedated, hence the connection to the prostitute being kept unconscious above. Those houses that blackmail also are often lower income and sell not just a child into sex but also sacrifice as well into MK, getting double the mileage out of the camera systems as brainwash techniques can be examined and refined. This was the early days of computers in 1981 when the story was first released. Pre-internet, these blackmail rings can be understood from the story of the finders, as they used telephone lines to coordinate with computers from 1977 to set up games for naked children to play. That's not me decoding its documented FBI history. Apple was released the same year as those TRS machines for $666.66. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak designed it and worked at Atari before this. Steve Jobs quit Atari after being inspired by an LSD trip in India, symbolism of MK Ops as publicly known to be about CIA using LSD to brainwash. Note: Neuromancer was released the same month as the original Macintosh. When Apple went popular, cyberpunk was part of the marketing campaign of Macintosh with their famous Super Bowl commercial. The simple fact they had Macintosh at the Super Bowl shows the scale of the push. Other famous cyberpunk tied into this being Blade Runner and Tron. I decoded Tron as it was related to the push against Atari. Remember the video game Crash of 1983, and given both films made $33 million released within 2 weeks of one another in 1982, it implies both were sending comms about the same thing. Blade Runner only became popular with the director's cut, which was released on September 11, 1992, within a day of Nintendo beating Atari in court. September 10, 1992. Atari loses court case to Nintendo. September 11, 1992. Blade Runner director's cut, Blade Runner becomes popular. Given this was a major inspiration of The Matrix. It makes me wonder about the Wachowskis transitioning. Matrix has in some sectors come to be redefined by a large portion of the community as symbolism for transgender. This is absurd and clearly not the intent for more reasons than I can give, but that is the psychological push. And transgender psych pushing is a huge thing. I noticed in my short time researching this, one of the most prominent sites for the literature has a writer they gave awards to named Morpheus, the most popular author, at least at one point in time, with hundreds if not thousands of stories pushing the idea of transgender. Just like with everything else I've covered, it slowly conditions people into adopting it. Escapism of sorts. Note the origin predating the very start of the internet too, by someone with the last name Rich, funding comms. One thing I don't understand is to what extent the push is an act by those involved. In Christopher Nolan's Prestige, the movie involves a running plot about how great magicians live their acts. One pretends to be feeble 24/7 for years to perform a single magic trick. When we consider the scope of ops and funding, it makes sense some would make their lives art. Some people are acting and others are not. Of those that are not acting, many are brainwashed, but that's not to say all of them are and that there isn't a legitimate transgender identity. I don't think it's anywhere near what we see. There is a clear motive to get people to shell out over $100 a month for hormones, and this is, I suspect, the origin of the psychological pushing. The pushing is what creates the majority of the demand, and the few that have legitimate gender issues become the excuse to give the majority who don't a path to body mutilation and a lifetime of regret. Those bottom two are from the past few years, and I suspect such things are indicative of the push in the other direction. I've decoded so much of the big industry as having switched against these destructive mindsets that exploit, and this is most apparent in the comms of recent Hollywood films. I already went over Keanu Reeves' new project Berserker finally putting an end to the killer, and this movie was released around the same time as Cyberpunk 2077 and that project. It is therefore the current ops of sorts. Updates: Bill and Ted 3 Face the Music. This film begins with the breakup of Bill and Ted alongside the point that all of reality/time is collapsing. Various famous events being distorted and removed. Face the music equals facing consequences of one's actions. Note the Durham boat. Which, as we've gone through this entire post, the comms attached to many Hollywood vehicles like this are now positive, at least for the majority of the human race. Given how things have changed, these comms fit the larger pattern of positive changes. In this case, instead of nonsense gibberish being pushed about historical figures, we have a story about generational change. Bill and Ted have unemployed daughters that emulate them. Symbolism for the countless people conditioned by the likes of Beavis and Butthead as well as all the other media discussed. Another major part of the story is the downfall of the band, going from playing for millions for playing for 40 people at an ELKS lodge, DOE/buck symbol. People are there for taco night, cheap shell symbolism. As in people still funding MK are going bankrupt. That at 7:17 p.m. they have to unite all of humanity. In prior films the story makes no sense intentionally, and in this one we have a highlight of this that won't make sense until the end. Another part is how things keep getting worse with their future selves being more and more depraved as they visit themselves. The farther in the future they go, the worse they see their actions cause for themselves. This is very different from the pushes of idiocy as a solution of the first two films. With the council deciding that world peace actually could be achieved not if they made the music but if they died. This ties into the final scene of the film where they still aren't dead. This ties into the berserker calm. How do you kill what he represents? Another part of the story is in learning his past. That along with defunding, sandwich calm, is the key. Being hunted now by the future, their wives leave them having recognized they are losers. In the first two films the whole story involved them triumphing over adversity with stupidity, whereas in this film they get punished for making bad decisions. Meanwhile their daughters go into time and recruit famous singers to help make the song that can unite all people. Unlike the disinfo films, these aren't caricatures, they are presented cinematically but not illogically and certainly not like cartoons. Bill and Ted go to the future and find their future selves have broken into the Foo Fighters band leader house and stolen his music to pass off as their own. Symbol for the MK ops going after famous figures, I suspect, which leads to them going to jail. Future Robot goes after their kids, runs the gamut of all the various issues going on right now, including Queen Elizabeth and the pyramid exposure. A fake death for a reason, which is precisely the same reason why the kids and celebrities go to hell. Hiding while potential threats are disarmed. So they go to their deathbeds and get the music to be played at 7:17 p.m., face the music, facing consequences. Calm of all the dead people who aren't really dead symbol, ducking lawsuits as well. As their conversation with death is about a restraining order from death. Keeping death away from family. Note the discussion of Death's Failure album in 1998, which reminded me of the failure mentioned in Cabin in the Woods in 1998 of the murder ops. I still haven't cracked what went wrong in 1998, but it's a lead I'll dig into later. Anyway, film finale begins with reality collapsing, and famous moments in time converging like moon landing. I take it to imply exposure of the Khan's world, but that is just me being optimistic. MP46. The ones to create the world-uniting music is their children, and that they are to back them up. Having a new generation of celebrities, there are generational power changes and the ones in the next generation can make different decisions. A changing of power or simply who will decide the direction of things going forward. Though we are in heavy speculation territory. In any case, they give instruments to everyone allowing them to play along and unite the world. Symbolism for the world becoming comms aware. Ends again with Durham boat. MP46 equals POTUS 46 Biden. Possibly. Face the music as in facing consequences. The movie carefully constructed of what's been going on now with Biden being positioned to take a big fall. Check past posts for more about the timetable on Durham as it relates to what's going on with Biden. I know people were hoping for a red wave, but much like when I originally decoded Trump would lose the 2020 election, these things are planned with long-term in mind. Seems it's still necessary for the smokescreen of Biden for the worldwide things going on. In my next post I'll be going more into this. There are still many films I could decode with Keanu Reeves, but I need to take a break from him as I had dreams about the guy thanks to this overdose of Reeves this week. Good thing I like the guy, or it would have been a nightmare. One mystery I didn't solve was of the lulls in his career, one happened right after The Matrix and another in between Constantine and John Wick. His career surges when he portrays a killer tied to John Doe, a box office heavyweight. There's a lot of possibilities, but the only thing I'm truly confident in is that he's one of many that is now sending comms for the removal of those operations. I'm glad to see the world isn't monstrous enough to continue it. This whole adopts an orphan to turn them into a murderer is mind-boggling how it managed to persist this long. Not literally adopt, but parents symbolically abort their child, and then they become adopted by a system of brainwash. That system has to go. I get that it was a defense against the same thing, but they exist because the structure of the comms world allows invisibility for evil and good. One day it'll all be revealed, but they have to deconstruct it first because it is the very mechanism that keeps people silent. The only way to make sure it never happens again is by getting educated, and that's exactly what any reader here is doing. The world is conditioned to move in wrong directions, and if I can move it in a better one, even if it's just a tiny bit, I will. I hope they embrace this as I do, the betterment of all mankind. I'm sure opening up that club to the masses is not the most appealing idea for many, but would you rather have a best friend or a dumb sheep nearby? Surely having a near infinite number of geniuses could lead to all sorts of revolutions in industry. It boggles my mind when I try and imagine the future with open communication and no more poisoning of the mind. Whatever problems arise from too many smart people will surely be offset by it. I don't intend on doing this forever. I do it because it needs to be done, and I will do it for as long as it helps. I want to see what a free and honest world looks like. Telegram chat. Join our Telegram group. Send leads, begin decoding. This has been Secrets of Red Pills.